Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, I'm Scott Sorrell. I'll be one of your hosts here tonight at the Real Science Exchange. And we're here tonight celebrating the latest research in one of my favorite sessions, and that is the Journal Club. First, let me introduce our resident Journal Club professor, Dr. Bill Weiss. Bill, thank you for joining us again here at the Real Science Exchange. What's in your glass tonight?
Well, I've got a glass of Smithwick's Red Ale from Irish. It's an Irish ale.
That sounds good, Bill. Would you mind introducing the author of the paper you decided to review tonight?
Paper's Changes in Milk Production and Estimated Income Over Feed Cost of Group-Housed Dairy Cows When Moved Between Pens. The author is Dr. Alex Bach, and I notice his location has changed. So he now is at the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Studies. That's different from the last time we talked in person. Yeah, you're gonna have to tell me what that is and what your new title is now.
Well, it's complicated because it's been always the same institution, but that institution, ICREA, it's just supporting researchers to go to wherever they want. So through ICREA, I was in a research institute. Then I left that institute. I still am in ICREA, and then I'm going to transfer to another university next year. So
this is more complicated than Ohio State. So. Yeah, I should mention you are in. I don't know if you're still in Barcelona, right? Or
That's right. I'm still in Barcelona.
We met many years ago in person, and then been in contact with each other a lot. I should also mention he is an editor. I think you're still editor.
Still surviving that, yeah. Still surviving that, yeah.
So he has a big influence on the nutrition papers in Journal of Dairy Science. So.
Oh, excellent. Well, welcome, Dr. Bach. As customary, I think we explained before, this is a virtual pub with real drinks. And so do you have anything in your glass tonight?
I have tea with milk.
Oh, tea with milk. Well, there you go. Very well. Terrific. Before we dive in, I can't proceed without welcoming my friend and co-host, Dr. Clay Zimmerman. Welcome, Clay. You have anything in your glass tonight?
Well, I have something in my cup. I do have some hard cider here in my cup this evening.
All right, I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Clay.
So, Scott, what's in your glass tonight?
So I'm not stepping out too far on the limb, Clay. I've got something called Rare Breed. It's from Wild Turkey. It's pretty good, actually. I usually, if I'm drinking Wild Turkey, I'll get the 101. I find that to be pretty good, a pretty good value, but I'm kind of liking this. So with that, cheers, everybody. Here's to a great podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Tonight's pubcast stories are brought to you by ReaShure Precision Release Choline. ReaShure is the most researched encapsulated choline on the market today, consistently delivering results to your transition cows of higher peak milk, reduced metabolic disorders, and even in utero benefits to her calf, leading to growth and health improvements. Visit balchem.com to learn more.
The paper tonight is titled Changes in Milk Production and Estimated Income Over Feed Cost of Group-Housed Dairy Cows When Moved Between Pens. Bill, why'd you settle on this paper tonight for the Journal Club?
Well, I'm a nutritionist, and there's a lot of good just basic nutrition papers, but I like also papers that are directly, almost immediately applicable to the industry. And this is one such paper, and this is also when I worked and was an extension, I got asked this question a lot: what's the cost of moving cows? And as we discussed this, there's not been a lot of research because it's really hard to do. And so you never kind of knew. You could kind of guess at an answer, but now we have some real data to help producers on cow management.
Very well. Dr. Bach, would you kind of like to give us an overview of what the paper entailed?
Yeah, basically the idea of the paper was exactly what Bill is saying, right? You get this question from producers. From the basics of nutrition that you have to make groups. Cows are different. They have different level of production. So what you want to do is feed them as close to their requirements as possible. But in a practical world, it's difficult. And there are always excuses. The farm is not designed to do that. It's more work. My cows will drop milk. And the idea was, okay, let's evaluate this. Let's get data from the field and see if that's the case or not. So we had data from 3 farms. We look at 3 different scenarios with different diets. And we actually look at what are the consequences, not only on milk production, but on the most important aspect, which is income over feed cost. So the idea was just putting black and white what happens when you group cows. And we just focus on income and feed cost. There would be other topics that would be covered, and it would be really interesting to study, like environmental impact of making groups, or health aspects on these cows, or reproduction performance of these animals. And we didn't cover that because we cannot cover everything, right? But I think it's an area of very interesting research and great development.
I guess one reading the introduction, one of the statistics you give that came from a survey said something like 65% of the big farms do not group by, basically anything related to income over feed cost. And that surprised me. I knew it wasn't a lot, but I thought it'd be, 50, 60% did it. What do you think are some hindrances for producers not doing this?
I think what you read in the literature is excuses on barn design and complication. I think that the most frequent answer that I get is they're afraid of losing milk, and milk is easier to quantify than income or feed cost. We don't really know what income or feed cost in a farm is. So if they only look at milk in the tank, they get afraid of it. No, that's one thing. And the other is simplicity. They have labor problems, and they are afraid that if they make 2 rations, people will make more mistakes. So they think that, hey, just 1 ration is simpler, less room for mistakes. These are the 2 main deterrents that I see in the field for applying this.
And this research directly addresses what I agree with you is the biggest thing is when you move cows, they're going to crash and burn and you're going to lose all this stuff. Or that's what they say. And they said this paper is one of the first that's attempted to address that. The cow cost of moving.
Right. And the beauty of it is that, yes, sometimes cows do drop too much in milk, and that causes a loss in income over feed cost and profit, but sometimes not. So it's a bit of an art. You really have to make the rations right and move the animal at the right time. So it's not as easy as it thinks. In theory, it should be working very nicely, but you can mess it up, and you can just make the wrong decision by grouping your cows. So that's what I found also interesting in this paper. That is, not everything is always good, right?
Yeah. And I think the fact you use 3 farms, that obviously makes it a broader interpretation. It's not just 1 farm, because a lot of things affect cow movement and pens and everything else. So that's definitely a strength of this paper, is the fact it is over three different farms. They were all in Spain, correct? I can't remember the details.
There were some in. I don't. Let's see. I think there's 1 in Italy and 2 in Spain.
Okay.
And what sizes were they?
There were mid-sized farms. The smallest one was 300 cows, and the biggest one was close to 1,000. So it's a variety of farms. Yeah.
So the other part of this that I like, and the second question here is, even in dairies where they have a lot of groups, the number of different rations that are on the farm, right? So these were pen moves and diet changes.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something that really strikes me. I mean, you walk to a farm, and we have a very good example. I mean, there are many farms in Europe like that. They are milking 1,000 cows or 800 cows. They have different groups. They have even a Primiparous group cows and a Multiparous and a fresh and blah blah, and they're all feeding the same diet. I mean, guys, you have to make a different TMR because you cannot feed everything in the same TMR for all the cows. You might as well, mix a different proportion of ingredients when you go to that pen or those pens. They don't do that, and that really strikes me.
To me, there are costs to moving, labor, management, etc. So if you're going to move cows, make it worthwhile and have different diets that are appropriate for the group. So
yeah, and what this paper shows is that there is a lot to gain actually. Just in terms of income or feed cost, if you do it right, you can make 20, 30 cents per cow a day extra, and that's a lot of money at the end of the month and at the end of the year. setting aside what I said before on environmental impact and reproduction and maintaining the body condition of the animals and all that.
And I think, like I said, this is hard research because you got pens, so it's hard to follow an animal. And I thought the way you approach this was very good. So would you give not in minute detail, but how you actually calculated the change in income over feed cost when you're only measuring, for example, feed intake for a group of cows. You don't know what the cow did. So could you go into that a little bit, please?
Yeah, that was actually the trickiest part of the paper. For us, it was very easy to predict. So what we did is we were tracing the cows over time. So we have daily milk weights. So it's very easy to predict. If you give me data on the last month of milk production on a daily basis of a cow, I can very much predict how much milk she's going to produce in the next 10 days or next 21 days. We know the milk curve shape, and we can do that for every cow. So that was the easy part. The most difficult part was, okay, how much are they eating, right? So we know how much they eat in the group, but what is the intake for every cow? So what we did is we used the NASEM equations, the new equations from the NRC 2001, now it's NASEM 2021. And it's two set of equations. So one uses animal data and the other one uses ration data. So we actually use the two equations to forecast intake. And then we took the average of these two equations and assign it to every animal. And of course, then, if you take the average of all the animals in a pen, it should coincide with the actual intake of the pen. And if that wasn't the case, then the deviation, it was like 2%, 3%, whatever it was, we assign that percent deviations to every cow. So then when we recalculate the average of every cow, then it's actually the same as the average of the pen.
Okay.
Once we know the intake of every animal, then we can calculate income or feed cost relatively easy.
And I said that's like I said, I never thought of doing that, and I thought that was a great part of this paper. Really thought that was a good idea how you did that.
And you ignored the moves from the fresh pen, right? Because the predictions are too messy in really early lactation.
Right. I mean, early lactation, cows are just driven by genetics mainly. So that will have a big impact on how much they perform and everything. So, and of course, because we also need data to forecast future milk production, we need some time before we do the pen, right? So, and the fresh pen, some cows were there only for 21 days. In some farms, they were there for 30 days. In some of them were for 40. So it was messy. So we could not use that data to do that.
And did you on the diets? These were it was their diets. You didn't work with saying let's change the diet to this, but this is what they were feeding, correct?
This is what they were feeding. We didn't do any intervention. Yeah.
Okay. So some of the changes are pretty small,
Yes.
but was their choice, not yours. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what is nice to see is that sometimes the changes are too small, and that does not compensate the loss in milk production, and therefore it didn't work. So it was not good. That's one thing that, because people are so afraid of losing milk, when they go from a high diet to a low diet, they tend to put a little bit more protein, a little bit more energy, just in case my cows don't lose a lot of milk, and they end up not making it work.
So Alex, I'm curious, when these pen moves were made, do you know any details about, were they moving multiple cows at a time? Do you know any of those details?
Sure. Yeah. Pen movements typically, and that was the case in this study, they take place once a week because that's when the cows are dry typically. So on a Tuesday or on a Thursday typically. So they were moving animals, all the cows that need to be dried, 20 animals, poof. So now I have 20 spots to move cows. So then I move my high cows to medium cows, my medium cows to low cows. So they were always moved in groups of 5 and more animals. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was the producer that made the decisions as to what cows moved, or did you provide insight, or how was that chosen?
No, that was the tricky part as well, because these producers are using a software that's called AutoMilk that we developed. That software provides assistance to the producers using artificial intelligence on when to move the cows and what to feed to the cows. So I had to talk to these guys and say, hey, don't pay attention to algo milk. Just move the cows whenever you feel the need to move them. So that was a decision made by the producers.
Okay. And then if you could then kind of and there's three farms again, and they didn't all do the same. I mean, the results were different. So if you'd kind of just walk through the big picture results from you have I just labeled them farm A, B, and C, but it can kind of on the big picture results and what you found in change in milk, change in intake, and then ultimately change in IOFC. Then
Well, it was so in Farm A, we basically had three different types of groups. We have animals that were on a high diet and they were moved into a medium production diet. And then we have a group of Primiparous cows that they were moved to a medium production diet as well. And then we have the tail enders, right? So the medium cows, the medium production animals were moved to a low production animals. And in that farm, everything worked very nicely in terms of income and feed cost, except for when the cows were moved from the medium to the low. And the reason of that failure was that, what I said before, the differences in nutrients between the ration for medium producing animals and low producing animals were very small. And the price difference was not big enough either. So these guys, when they moved from medium to low, they lost about 2 kilos of milk. And the savings in diet did not compensate that loss. In the other scenarios, they always worked, and they made about 20 cents more per cow a day, and it worked very nicely. One interesting thing in this farm, and we also saw that in another farm, and we also found that in the literature, we were moving in the Primiparous groups, right? So we have cows of Primiparous animals groups. They move from this group to a medium production group that has a mixture of animals. So it has animals, they are medium producers, so they are about 35 liters or so. But of course, there are multiparous cows there. So we were expecting, well, maybe these Primiparous cows, when they go into the multiparous cows group, they're going to stumble because they're going to be afraid of the more adult animals. And when we did the maths, we were expecting a bigger drop of milk that we actually observed. And if you look in the literature, there seems to be a repeatable scenario that when Primiparous cows are moved into multiparous, they are resilient. They don't drop as much milk as one would expect. That was a bit of a surprise, but that's what we found. And we found that in Farm A, and it also occurred in Farm B, and also in Farm C. So it was repeatable in the three farms.
So Alex, I am curious. So the changes from the Primiparous groups to the other, to the other diet, they were a little later, further along into lactation, right? I think they averaged what, maybe 190 to over 200 days in milk at when those pen changes were made. Could you speculate? Do you think you'd see the same thing if it was happening earlier in lactation?
Yeah, probably not. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, we have that discussion in the paper where one of the reasons why we think these cows didn't lose as much milk as we thought, and that's something that people don't realize, is that, okay, we're moving the Primiparous cows from one pen to the other, and that would apply to all the cows. These cows that we're moving are very advanced in lactation, so they produce less milk, and they're probably overfed, so they're getting more nutrients than what they need, and they're not producing more milk because genetically they cannot do that, and they're just building body fat and accretion. So when you move them, they might actually be intimidated by the multiparous cows, and their intake might be a little bit lower, but still they're able to get all the nutrients they need because before they were overfed. So had we moved these cows before, earlier in lactation, I don't know, because milk production is still pretty flat in these Primiparous cows. So it's not a matter of milk production, but it's a matter of growth. These guys are growing from day one after calving, right? They are still developing. So if we give them more time to grow, 200 more days, by the time of movement, they'll probably have a lower nutrient requirement, and that allows them to cope better with the change.
Do you remember? And I looked, I couldn't see this on crowdedness in these pens, like both stall feeding bunk space per head and stalls. Were they crowded or?
Right. No, this and that's quite common in Spain and in Italy where this took place. Uh, the software that we use is called AlgoMilk. Again, it keeps track of stocking density, and the average stocking density in these 3 hertz is around 98%.
Okay.
So they actually have more space available for the cows than they are not crowded at all. No.
Do you think in the U.S. it would be more common to have overstocking?
Yeah.
Hopefully not by too much. But do you think these results would be if you were at 10% or 20% over, or do you think they'd be a little more dramatic of a loss?
Uh, it's It's difficult to answer depending on how you calculate the stocking density and how you look at your animal numbers, right? Uh, if if what's restricting or if the limiting factor is feedback access, I wouldn't be that worried. If the limiting factor is the cubicles or lying space, then I would be more worried.
Mhm.
The reason why I say that, or I think that, is because cows are only spend eating 4, maximum 5 hours a day. So even if it is a little feedback space, they can take turns, and they will take turns. Cows are no conflict animals, so they will learn very rapidly who's the boss and who's not, and they will patiently wait. So if we have overcrowding in terms of feed bank space, but we make sure that there is always feed available and it's fresh feed in the feed bank, I think it will be okay. Now, if there is a limitation of bedding or cubicles, that's a different thing because the cows, they do need to lay down good 11, 12 hours a day. And if it's overcrowding, that's not going to happen.
Then I'm looking at this table here that on the changes in nutrients before and after the changes, and protein drops. It varies a bit on the herds, but usually it's less than one crude protein, less than 1% unit. Usually NELs, couple percent drop. What do you is again? These are pretty subtle and pretty small. And I know that you can't answer it from the data, so I'm asking you to extrapolate a bit here. But do you think would if you were making these changes, maintain protein, drop energy, drop them both based on production expected production, or how would you do the nutrients? And if you could, let's limit it to just 2 pens. You can only have 2 diets, a high and a low group, or something like that.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, and it's a question that we nutritionists tend not to make ourselves. And every time I do some teaching and also talk to nutritionists, the single most important question that we should ask when we do a ration is at what level of production are we going to make the ration for that pen? And when you ask that question, there is no answer. It's, well, I look at the average, and because I'm afraid of losing milk, I just put 2 more liters of milk.
Yeah.
And why 2 liters and not four or one or -1? And that makes a big difference because a ration for 80 pounds costs much less than a ration for 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And if only 10% of the cows are able to use those extra nutrients, you're going to lose money. So overfeeding, it's very complicated. So back to your question, when I do rations for groups, I make rations that are much more different than this. So I usually go for 1.5, 2 points in percentage in protein, and energy-wise, it's also 0.2 or so. So it's much bigger changes than this. But again, these were changes made by nutritionists, and
Yeah.
they're always afraid of looking at milk losses.
Yes, and the other, there's only so many spaces, so you got to keep the pens full. So there is sometimes you can't move the cows you want to move. But would you, if again, let's just say you can only have 2 diets, so would you have maybe 1 pen balance for the top third production and so again, I know you have to pick a milk yield. How would you
Okay.
do that?
Yeah. What I do when I try to select to make, so if I have a group of cows, I need, okay, at what level of production am I going to feed these animals? My first approach is I look at histogram and I do the percentage. So I look at the quantiles, and I want to make a ration that satisfies at least 70% of the animals in my pen. 30% of those above a little, I don't know, 40 or 30 liters, so sorry, 80 or 90 pounds, they will not be satisfied by the diet. So that's okay. They will lose a little bit of condition. Hopefully, they will put it back later on. So I would do that. So I would look at my high pen and I would make a ration for these guys to cover the 70% of their needs. No, not 70% of the needs, 70% of the animals in that pen. And then I would do another ration for the low. And there I would probably go a little bit lower even. So I would go for 60. That depends on the genetics of the herd or the body condition. So it's a little bit of an art. That's the tricky thing, right? We don't have a method to decide at what level of production we want to feed this group.
So on the so in the higher group, you're basically going a standard deviation above the mean.
Pretty much, exactly. Yeah. 1.6. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And in the lower group, I will go to 60% or so.
And would you? I know we're getting off track here from the actual paper. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But would you on this when you set up the group, and you would basically do protein and energy the same? Not say I'm going to make sure there's a little and maybe balance to 2 standard deviations for protein, 1 standard deviation for energy for the means, or would you do both essentially the same over?
No. I do a bigger difference in protein than in energy.
Okay. Well, you're right, because that's what I do too. So
Exactly. No, yeah. That's what I do.
okay. Another thing you did, which I think is really important when you do this kind of stuff, is you looked at sensitivity. In other words, you have to, in a lot of your calculations, you set a milk price, you set a feed price, and that's what we have to do. But then you also said what happens when milk goes up or down 10%, feed goes up or down 10%. Would you discuss what you found on as those two things, and they can change independently. One can go up and one can go down. But
right,
what did you find on that?
Yeah, well, we found that it's if milk prices go up, then making groups is a little bit less interesting. So the higher the milk price, the more resilient your farm will be to a single diet. Uh, in the feed cost is opposite. So the lower the feed cost, the more interesting, the less interesting it is to have groups. And of course, the most interesting scenario is when you have high feed cost and low milk prices. That's where it's almost mandatory to make groups if you want to survive in the dairy business.
Well, we had that latter scenario in the U.S. for sure
Yes.
right now.
Yeah. It's not an uncommon scenario in the U.S. and and everywhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the trend was the same. So the farms that when they move one cow from the one pen to the other, they had a positive outcome. They still had a positive outcome. But as milk price went up, that positive outcome was a bit lower. So it was a straight line. It's not it changes direction. It's just the same. But the outcome is a bit smaller.
So I'm fascinated by all of the. I really like how you put a graph in here for each farm and each pen
movement.
change.
Yeah.
Yes, I thought I thought that was pretty fascinating looking at these, and so you were comparing 21 days before the move to 21 days after, and you've got a prediction in there both for milk and income over feed costs, and looking at most of these graphs, it looks like in general the milk yield is lower than predicted for about 10 days post pen move.
Yeah.
Has that been seen before, or I'm curious your comments about that?
Yeah. There are some studies, old studies from the 70s and even the 60s, where they were looking at this. And what you see in the literature is that they have decreases of 4%, 6% milk production, very transient, the first day, maybe the first week, no more than that. So it really coincides with what's in the literature.
then I guess getting back to this sensitivity thing, which I want to stick with what we were on. You give these graphs like Clay was talking really good. It's means. You moved 10 cows in a move. Did you look at, say, when a single move, when they moved 10, how much did cow to cow variance, or did you look at that? Were they all dropped 2-3 kilos, or did some not do anything and some just crashed?
I did not look at that, and I don't remember that from the top of my head. My guess is that there will be some variation, but I don't remember how much it was.
Okay.
But that for sure there is variation. Yeah.
That'd just be, is it, if there was, you might be able to tease out, what cows are more susceptible to a pen move
Right.
and which ones can handle it. So
For sure. For sure. Yeah, and that's actually what AlgoMill does. It looks at the expected production, the drop that you expect when you move one cow from one pen to the other, and then it will determine the exact moment of moving them.
I did have one more question on sensitivity. You have graphs here where change in feed price, change in milk price. The effects of changing feed prices were pretty consistent across the three farms. But the
Yes.
change in milk price, two of the farms did about the same thing. The income over feed cost changed about the same as milk price went up, but down. One of them changed a lot. I don't know which farm that is.
Farm C, I think it was.
Farm
No?
C, really, that the slope of that line is probably twice what the other ones are. Do you ever why that farm was so sensitive to milk prices?
Well, that farm, it's peculiar because they have a pen movement that it's. At some point, I debated whether to put it or not in the paper. But I said, "Hey, this is reality. This is what people do." These guys had a group of Primiparous cows that were moved to a high yielding cows. So it's a very strange and unnatural movement, no, if you wish. So, and of course, they
Yeah.
lose a lot of money. These Primiparous cows, when they go to a high diet, they just stumble and they had 2 kilos less of milk, and they lose about 50 cents per cow a day.
And there was very little difference in feed price per ton, right? There's a
Absolutely.
very small feed
Yeah.
cost difference.
Which is the
Okay.
other caveat when you do grouping. So people just look at nutrients, and sometimes because of feed prices, when you try to reduce energy and protein, somehow the diet doesn't decrease as much in price. So you actually have to look at, okay, how much does it cost me a megacal of energy, and how much does it cost me a pound of protein, and then use that, because if the cost per pound of protein or the cost per megacal of energy is higher or equal in the receiving diet, you're going to lose money, even if that diet is a bit cheaper in price. Okay, so and that's what happened here. So I think that's why, Bill, it's so sensitive to milk prices in this farm, because it's a very upward pen movement.
And economics and dollars and euros are a little hard to, we can't be too conclusive on this. But do you have suggestions on how much the price per kilo or price per pound of feed should differ? And if you could do it in percentage rather than euros or dollars.
Right. Yeah. Percentage would be, let's see. I always try to have a difference at least of 20 euros between
Okay.
the original diet and the following one, or the receiving one. And typically feed cost in Europe we're talking about 280, 250. So we're talking about a percentage wise, 12%, 13%.
Okay, so a fair amount to make it worthwhile.
It has to be drastic. Yeah. Because
Okay.
that's what we need to understand. The outcome is not more milk production, is more income or feed cost.
Exactly.
And yes, we will lose milk for a few days, but it's only a few days. Then the cows are on their spot. They are on their requirements. They are very efficient. We always tend to look at the cows as being very efficient at early lactation, and we think that these are the cows that make money in a farm, and that's totally true. But then we have the tail enders, and those are the ones that they eat away all the benefits from the high producing animals. So every small improvement in efficiency of these low producing animals is a huge opportunity for producers to make more money.
So the feed costs you were mentioning, is that euros per ton?
Yes.
Okay. And then the base milk price that you were using to do the original calculations, I think it was 32. It was 32 euros per liter.
That's correct.
And
Yeah.
I think right now I was doing the math on that. I think that's about $16 per hundredweight in the
Yes.
U.S. But I love the sensitivity analysis. That's really good.
Yeah, nowadays here in Europe, the milk price has gone up. So instead of being 32, it's 50. Okay, so it's 50 cents.
Ah,
Yeah,
They're
so,
sending their milk over there or so.
that's
well,
right.
but feed costs are very, very high as well. So when you look at income of feed cost, it's still in the order of 10 euros per cow and day. So it's not that they're making more money. They're just able to pay for the feed, which before they were not.
Did you? And again, it may have been in there and I missed it. But did you do anything on either body condition or body weight? Because they
No,
made a lost milk, or they might have come back in milk, but they're still losing a condition. Or
we don't have data on body condition. We do have data on body weight in one farm. And because it was only one farm, I did not include it in the paper.
okay,
There were small changes in body weight, actually. Okay, so we actually were seeing that these Primiparous cows were like that, and then when they were moved, they stopped putting weight. So we did see some changes in body weight, absolutely. But
So
it's only in farm A, if I'm not mistaken.
so along those lines, were you able to monitor milk components?
Yeah, milk components was there. Milk components was on a monthly basis, right?
Okay.
So, and this was a change that took place once a week. So we had data from maybe 30 days before, maybe 10 days later. So it was difficult to use that data. So we decided to stay away from it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a very important question, and that's some research that needs to be done. It's not only milk; it's also the components of that milk that dictates the price and the income of feed cost.
another calculation you made was you looked at change in nutrient intake and projected milk change from just the nutrients, and then you compared that to what they actually did.
Yes.
Could you go into the results of that a little? Because they were those a little bit different farm to farm, but they were, to me, pretty consistent on what you found.
Yeah, they were very consistent, and they were surprised. I mean, in general, they were surprising because they always lost less milk that it would be predicted. Okay, we were predicting, I don't know, that the cows would lose 2 kilos of milk, but they only lost half a kilo. So, and that could be due to many reasons, but I think the main reason is that the cows were overfed before we moved them. So that's why they don't lose as much. And when we assume that they were eating that much, but they're overfed. So when they go to a diet that provides less nutrient, because before they had spare nutrients, now they lose a little bit less milk.
Okay.
But they were very consistent,
Yeah.
especially in Primiparous cows.
Yeah. I would have guessed if, because of the change, it would have upset the rumen a little bit and all, they would have been a little less efficient, at least for short
Exactly.
term, and they'd actually you'd find the opposite of what you found. So
Absolutely, and that's what we were expecting. And we were expecting, okay, the animal will be upset because she lost her friends and now she's a new pen with intimidating cows. She needs to adapt to the social hierarchy. Now she's getting a different diet, a little bit more fiber perhaps, so the rumen is going to be a little bit clunky. But they continue to produce milk. They lost some milk, but not as much as we predicted. Yeah.
okay.
So that was surprising, but
Do you know of anybody done things like you got all these chewing monitors and rumination monitors and so on? Do you know if anybody's done studies with those looking at when you move a cow or cows?
I'm not aware of that. I'm
I'm
not
not
aware.
either, but
Yeah,
with the technology we have now, those types of things would be, I think, very interesting to
it
see.
would be very interesting. One concern I have with the rumination devices is that you always need a measure of intake because The cows that ruminate the most are typically the ones that are in acidosis, or are the ones that are actually eating more. That's why they ruminate more. Um, and people think, oh, my rumination is going down, so I have a ruminant problem, and it's really an intake problem. So it's difficult data to interpret without having the actual grammar intake.
I'm thinking if they did something like you, where they follow it pre and post and do some predictions on what it should have been if nothing changes, and then look at the deviation from the expected, something like that. But
That would be a really cool study, Bill. Yeah.
there is a transient drop in milk. Do you have any suggestions on what producers might do to? You're not going to eliminate it. I don't think that's possible, but any suggestions on ways to reduce the negative, even though it's transient, the negative effect of movement?
I don't think we can avoid that. I think it's because we're changing the animal from one social structure to the other, and it's very good literature saying that's going to have a toll. And the other is that we're giving them less nutrients, so we cannot expect the same outcome with less nutrients. But for sure, when you do pen movements, one thing that I would make sure I do is they have enough space on the receiving pen, and that the cows are moved in groups. Group meaning 5 or more.
And so if there's not a lot you can do to stop the transient drop in milk, then you just have to make the change worthwhile. You have to change the feed cost enough. You live with the lost milk, but you just have to make it worthwhile.
Right. And I have a producer in Italy, in the Piemonte area, that he was surprised because he actually started looking at these groups and making groups and changing all the diets and all that. He moved from one single diet to group feeding. And he went from one single diet to 3 diets. And the guy is very, very good. He's an average production of 41 liters per day. And he was surprised because overall, milk production from the herd did not decrease. So he could not understand why, having some cows that were losing milk when they were moved, where did that milk go, right? So it's you don't lose it. It's just a transient lose, but you actually compensate later on with these cows being better and being more efficient and all that. So it's the total milk production of a herd when you make groups is actually not lower than when you don't.
I was curious, does it make any difference, when you're actually making these moves relative to, either feeding time or feed availability?
Yeah, feed availability is crucial. Yeah, this thing will crash if cows don't have feed in front and the feed is not fresh. That's for sure. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so I asked this question to every author. What's next? Are you going to keep this line of research going, or what other projects are you working on along those lines?
What this project has brought to my attention is: do we really need a Primiparous cows group? So you go to a farm, even if they have a single diet or have no groups, very likely they will have a Primiparous cows group. Is that really necessary? That's the question I'm trying to answer now. So I'm looking at what happens when you actually mix Primiparous cows with multiparous cows. Are you losing milk? Are you losing reproduction? So that's what I'm working on now.
That's a good question, because for years that's my standard recommendation. If you get
right,
that's
it makes
first
sense.
grouping is heifers or first lactation and everything else.
It makes sense, but there is no data to support it.
So.
And it just makes sense and it's okay. Yeah. But then when you look at things as it happens in this study where, hey, when these guys are mixed with multiparous, they seem to be okay. They do actually very well. So do we really need that? Can we use that pen that is uniquely devoted to Primiparous cows to some other cows? Or can we do something with it? So that's what I'm trying to answer now.
That's a good question to answer. So I'm glad you're doing that.
All right, very well, Bill. You always do a great job with these, right? But I think tonight you really outdid yourself. This has been a very interesting paper, very interesting conversation, and the guest was top-notch as well. Dr. Bach, you did a great job. In fact, Clay, I think we need to invite him to give a lecture on our Real Science Lecture Series. So
yes.
maybe we'll be in touch, Dr. Bach, to see if we can arrange for that. It's been a great conversation. I'd like to leave the audience with just one thought. If you guys had one key takeaway for the audience, what would that be? And Clay, would you mind starting us off?
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by NitroSure Precision Release Nitrogen. NitroSure delivers a complete TMR for the rumen microbiome, helping you feed the microbes that feed your cows. To learn more about maximizing microbial protein output while reducing your carbon footprint, visit balchem.com/NitroSure.
Yeah, my key takeaway is from the sensitivity analysis, right? And as you were saying at the beginning, in times of lower milk prices and high feed costs, having different diets available and making the and different groups available, it's really huge economically. I think we get lazy at times. We get lazy when we have these really high priced milk periods with lower feed costs and only having one lactating diet. But it's really huge economically when times get tougher.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Dr. Bach, what kind of final comments do you have?
I think I'd like to invite the audience to experiment a little bit with it. So don't be afraid of losing milk and look beyond milk. Put in place mechanisms in the farm that allows you to measure IOFC. That's the ultimate goal. And also just playing with this and being in different farms, doing different rations. I've been surprised how flexible cows are. So don't be afraid of making a mistake. If something goes wrong, it will go wrong for a short period of time. You can correct it. You can change the diet right away. And the cows they're plastic. They will recover. So it's not that you're losing all the milk and you made a mistake and you're doomed. So just experiment with it and play with it.
Very good. And Dr. Weiss, any final words of wisdom for us?
I'm going to repeat what Alex said pretty much, and that is, changing milk is only half the equation. And it is income over feed cost that matters. And I think we just accept you're going to lose some milk, so make the diet change enough to pay for what we know is going to happen. And don't ignore the milk loss, but remember the ultimate goal is to maximize income over feed cost.
Yep, well said, Bill. Gentlemen, this has been a good one. Appreciate you sharing your research, your time, your passion. I'm sure the audience is enjoying it. And speaking of the audience, we want to thank our loyal listeners for coming along once again to join us here at the pub. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun. And we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests. So please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.